Hello and welcome to Model Kit Stuff, and today's Focus on Tools video is looking at sprue cutters. So sprue cutters have been around for a little while, and as their name suggests, the idea behind them is to cut parts off your sprue. Now, if you don't have sprue cutters, you're likely to be using a knife or doing what I did as a kid and twist your parts off the sprue, and I absolutely wouldn't recommend it, but that's how I used to do it when I first started out in the hobby when I was 6 and 7. That's how I'd be removing my parts. Then you tend to progress to using a knife, and the problem with using a knife is sometimes the parts aren't flat, so you're risking putting stress on the part and damaging the part. Sometimes the plastic is really quite hard, and you've got to put a lot of pressure on with your knife, and you risk actually damaging the blade of the knife. So it's not ideal, and I would recommend that you move away from using a knife and look at a sprue cutter as soon as you can afford. So are they an essential tool? I would say yes, but you can get by without them if you've not got them, but the sooner you get a pair the better. Now the problem comes when you decide that you're going to get a set of sprue cutters. There's so many out there. What do you choose? Well, let me talk you through the differences between the sprue cutters to help you make that decision. So the first thing to say is when you're going to look for sprue cutters is that's what you want to look for. Don't think you could get away with wire cutters or something like that. The problem with wire cutters is twofold. Firstly, they've not been designed to get into tight areas, so you're going to struggle to actually get in to some of the parts on a sprue, just because of how chunky the cutting blade is. And secondly, the cutting blade for wire cutters is a different type of blade edge than a proper sprue cutter. And what you might be able to see there is actually the cutting edge is quite thick, because what a wire cutter does is it basically squeezes the wire and pinches it until it breaks. So you've got two edges on each side, so you've got 4 cutting edges squeezing together to make that squeeze that makes the break. So it works in the same principle as a sprue cutter, but it's not designed for cutting sprue, and therefore it's not great at it. So you are best with the proper sprue cutting tool. Now, there is so many different types of sprue cutters out there. What do you go for? There are cheap ones, there are free ones, there are expensive ones. Which is the way to go? Well, let's start at the very beginning. Why are some expensive and why are some cheap? Well, there is 2 reasons why you'll have a big difference in the price of sprue cutters. Firstly, it's down to the cost of manufacturing them. So these 2 sprue cutters here are much more cheaply made, and it's not that they've necessarily used cheaper materials, but the manufacturing processes are simpler and quicker. So both of these are punched out of a sheet, so you can see, if you look on the side of this here, you can see where the punching tool has gone through and stopped at the edge there. That little lip there means that this was punched out. So this was basically a sheet that's punched out lots and lots of these metal pieces, and then they've been bent and ground and what have you afterwards. So that's it's cheaper than laser cutting. It's a really cheap, fast way of mass producing. These are machined, so that makes them much more expensive. So the process involved is more expensive. The time it takes to manufacture them is longer, therefore your cost against your overhead is greater. So That is the first reason. The second reason is brand. You will pay for a brand name. So if you buy Tamiya ones, for example, they will be machined, so they will be more expensive partly for that reason because they're a precision-made tool, but they'll also have an element of that cost tied to the word Tamiya. So you are paying for the name to a certain point, but it's not all about paying for the name. It's about the manufacturing as much as anything. So that's why you find such a vast range of prices. Now, does that mean that a more expensive one is better? Well, that depends on how we define better. If you're looking for something to do the job, you may well get away with one of the cheaper ones. This is depending on your budget, really. So these ones here actually came free. I've got two of these now. Both my daughters have got these ones, and they were free. They came with a model kit that I ordered from an online company that I use a fair amount for my ship kits. And they're able to give these away, which gives you an idea of how inexpensive they are. And they do the job. So if I want to cut something fairly small off a sprue, I can do that. They do the job. These ones were bought, but are at the cheap end. And again, they will get in and they will do the job. And these ones are my most recent purchase, and they were very expensive. And they will also do the job. So what's the difference? Well, the differences get quite small. We're really talking about two different things when we come to the use of these cutters. One is how easy they get into the parts to cut, and secondly, how easy are they to use in terms of the amount of force that you need to close them. So if you're doing a lot of sprue cutting, lots of small parts or something like that, do your hands get tired? So let's have a think about that. There isn't really a big difference between how much exhaustion your hand gets, how much stress goes on your hand from using them. They all have different methods. They're all using some form of spring. So this one actually has a spring. This one has a type of tension spring. And this one has a piece of metal that springs backwards and forwards. Again, it's a more cheap manufacturing method. What you're really looking for is the shape and type of blade when it comes to cutting. So what I've found over a number of years that I've used different cutters, and I've had other cutters and these that have been thrown away or whatever reason I don't have anymore. There is maybe three real things that you're looking for when you buy your cutters. First of all, you want a flat edge, and all of these have a flat edge. So when you put the blades together, you can see that all of these have a flat edge, all of them machined one way or another, and that is so that you can get in as close as you like to your part and cut close to your part. Now, I would always recommend you leave a bit of a gap and something to file down, just so that you don't put any stress on the part and damage it. But having that flat edge means that once you've got the part off, you can trim it down and save yourself some time before you actually need to start getting your sanding sticks out. So you want a flat edge. So that's important, but it's also common to most of them. So as long as you've got a machine flat edge, that's fine. The most important thing really is a combination of the depth of the cutting blades and how pointed they are to actually get in, and then we'll talk about cutting blades separately, which is the decider for me. So you can see these ones here have a very, very steep angle. That's because the material is quite thick. So they go to a point, but they're not as pointed as these ones. And when you want to get in and cut something, these ones can present you with a bit of an issue. So as you'll see here, where you've got the number, I can't actually get in particularly easily to that part. I can, and I will do it, but I'll end up cutting further away to be able to get to the part, leaving a bigger nub that I've got to clean off. Now, these ones are thinner, so my cutting angle isn't as steep, and they also have more of a point, which means I can get in easier. Take this off and show you. So I have less of a nub left to clean up. So having a narrow point at the end is an important consideration. But the next thing is the depth of the cutting blade, because that is holding you away from your tool, from your part. So if your sprue is really thick, let's see if we can find one. So if you've got a thick sprue and a short gate, having a tall shoulder on your cutting edge can sometimes get in the way of getting into your part. And we are talking finer detail here, whereas these ones, you'll notice, have a very, very thin blade. And what that means is that I can get into really, really tight spots with these and get right up to the edge and leave virtually nothing for cleaning up. And that's because my shoulder is really, really thin. So I can get in to tight corners and small gaps a lot easier. So that's your main consideration. You want a nice long tapered point, and you want a cutting shoulder on the blade that's as shallow as possible. Those are the two considerations. So if I was looking at these two to buy, then I'd be going with this one over that one. However, there is another consideration, and this is something I discovered more recently. These are my favourite sprue cutters that I've used, and it took me a little bit of time to work out why they were my favourite. Firstly, they're lighter, but that's not a massive issue because it's not a tool you're using all the time, it's occasional. As in you're picking it up and putting it down all the time. It's not in constant use. It's well made and it's light. When you're nipping, you don't need much force. You can do it with finger and thumb. It doesn't take much effort to make it work. But actually, what I've discovered is the reason why I like these so much is because of the way they cut, and they cut really, really nicely. It's like, to use a term, a hot knife going through butter. So they're just really easy to work, and the reason is they only have one cutting blade. So these both have two cutting blades. This one only has one, and it actually makes a big difference. So if I show you by cutting through some sprue, so let me take these parts off. So when this cuts, what it's doing is it's squeezing the part because it's cutting in from both, and the plastic on this is so hard that actually it's snapped when the cutter's about so far in, and we've got I don't know, about half of the actual thickness of the plastic, and it's snapped. When you come to cut with these, what you'll find is the blade is coming in from each side and it's squeezing the plastic, and actually the plastic is snapping when the blade is part the way through, so it leaves you with quite a rough edge, and you're more likely to cause damage to your part using these. Although I've got to say I've not really ever caused any damage, that it is a higher risk. And what it's basically doing is it's pinching a V shape into your plastic. So it's cutting in from both sides. It's flat on one edge. So you actually, if you went all the way through without it snapping, I'm going to do it slowly to see if I can make it cut all the way through. No, I can't. It snaps because of the tall shoulder. But what you're actually doing is you're squeezing the plastic while the blade travels through. And it's the same with these, even with a smaller shoulder. Now I expect these will cut a little better, let's see. Yeah, same thing, it's breaking the... There, done it slowly, and you can see, take this off, you can see how that's cut a V shape into the end of the sprue there, because what it's doing is the same as that one. It's squeezing from both sides because it's cutting in from both sides. But these ones, they're only cutting from one side, so it's acting a bit like a knife, and it's going in at one edge until it meets the other side. And what this, so you've got a cutting blade, and what this blade is doing is it's actually just resting against the part, waiting for the blade to arrive. So if I cut through this, it didn't snap the part, there's no flick off, and both of my cutting surfaces are nice and flat and smooth. And that's because I've got a very thin blade with virtually no shoulder on it and only one cutting blade. So it was fairly recently that it dawned on me what it was that was making these cutters feel so good to use. So these were £25. Do shop around because they do vary a little bit in price. And these are Display. I'm still not sure how you pronounce it. So these are my favourite sprue cutters that I've ever had. But what I would say is shop around, have a look at how pointed your cutting blades are and how shallow your shoulder is, and if you can afford to get one with just one cutting blade, then they tend to cut better than with two cutting blades. So that's what you're looking for when you come to buy sprue cutters. Are they an essential tool? I think the sooner you get them, the better. So yes, they are really, but you can take parts off without them. You just might be causing yourself other problems. So that's it. That's my thoughts on buying sprue cutters. I hope you found that helpful. In the meantime, enjoy your modelling. Take care, everyone, and I will see you very soon.